The air hung thick and heavy over Cleveland that autumn evening in 1983, a premonition of the chill that would soon permeate not just the physical landscape, but the very soul of a community. A young woman, LaToya Jenkins, barely 22, stepped out from the warm glow of her family's humble home in the bustling central neighborhood, her laughter still echoing softly from a shared joke with her younger sister. She was radiant, a beacon of youthful optimism, clutching her worn textbook for an evening class at Cleveland State, her dreams as vivid and sprawling as the vast expanse of Lake Erie just a few miles north. The streetlights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe like specters in the deepening twilight. The scent of burning leaves mingled with the faint, comforting aroma of home-cooked meals wafting from open windows, a symphony of urban life that was, for LaToya, the sound of home, safety, and routine. But routine was a fragile illusion, easily shattered, and safety, a concept often taken for granted, was about to unravel into a terrifying abyss. This was the night LaToya vanished. Was it a random act of savagery, or did a predator lurk, unseen, among the very foundations of trust? Tonight, we delve into the chilling cold case of Cleveland, Ohio, 1983, and the shocking truth that stunned its Black community when an arrest finally came decades later. Before we plunge into the depths of this harrowing tale, tell me, from where in the world are you watching this story unfold? And if you find yourself drawn into the shadows of these narratives, remember to subscribe. Your support helps this channel continue to bring these critical stories to light. LaToya Jenkins was more than just a name. She was a vibrant thread woven into the fabric of the central neighborhood. A gifted student, an aspiring teacher, and a loving daughter, she represented the hopes and aspirations of a generation. Her parents, Robert and Eleanor Jenkins, had instilled in their children a fierce determination and an unwavering belief in education as the key to a better future. LaToya embodied this ethos, diligently pursuing her degree, working part-time at a local library, and actively participating in her church choir. She was known for her infectious smile, her quiet strength, and a sharp intellect that belied her gentle demeanor. On that fateful Wednesday, October 26, 1983, LaToya had spent her afternoon at the library preparing for a midterm exam. She returned home briefly around 5:30 p.m., sharing a quick meal with her family, promising to be back before midnight. Her evening class, an advanced literature seminar, started at 7 p.m. The campus was only a 20-minute bus ride away, a route she knew intimately, having traversed it countless times. As she stepped out, the crisp autumn air nipped at her cheeks, a prelude to the biting Ohio winter. She waved goodbye to her sister Malaya, who was peeking through the living room curtains, her small hand pressed against the glass. It was a fleeting moment, an ordinary farewell, yet it would haunt Malaya for the rest of her life, forever etched in her memory as the last glimpse of her vibrant elder sister. LaToya walked with purpose towards the bus stop, a familiar corner just 2 blocks from her house, beneath a towering oak tree that had shed most of its leaves, leaving skeletal branches clawing at the bruised purple sky. When LaToya didn't return home by midnight, her mother, Eleanor, felt the first icy tendrils of fear coil in her stomach. It was unlike LaToya to be late, and even more unlike her not to call. The phone, a rotary dial relic, sat stubbornly silent on the kitchen counter. Robert, ever the pragmatist, initially suggested she might have stayed late studying with a classmate, or perhaps missed the last bus and was waiting for a ride. But as the hours stretched into the agonizing silence of early morning, the pragmatic explanations began to crumble under the weight of a mother's intuition. By 3 a.m., Eleanor was frantic, pacing the worn linoleum of her kitchen, each creak of the floorboards amplifying the crushing emptiness of the house. Robert, his face etched with a fear he desperately tried to conceal, began calling LaToya's friends, her classmates, the university's security office. Each unanswered ring, each confused voice on the other end, chipped away at their hope. The sun eventually began its reluctant ascent, painting the sky in hues of gray and pale pink, but for the Jenkins family, the world remained shrouded in an impenetrable darkness. At 7 a.m., a distraught Robert Jenkins dialed the Cleveland Police Department, his voice trembling as he reported his daughter missing. What followed was a frustrating, almost humiliating series of interactions that laid bare the systemic indifference faced by many Black families in that era. The initial response was lukewarm, bordering on dismissive. The dispatcher, her tone flat and devoid of urgency, suggested LaToya was likely a runaway, a common misconception often applied to young Black women, regardless of their circumstances or character. Robert vehemently protested, describing LaToya's academic dedication, her stable home life, her future plans. He emphasized her responsibility, her steadfast nature. The officer on duty informed him they couldn't file a missing person report until LaToya had been gone for at least 48 hours, a policy that felt like a cruel eternity to a family already grappling with unimaginable dread. The bureaucratic barrier was a blow, a stark reminder of who held power and whose lives were deemed less worthy of immediate action. Undeterred, the Jenkins family mobilized their own search. Robert plastered handmade flyers with LaToya's smiling face across the neighborhood, on lampposts, inside convenience stores, taped to bus shelters. Eleanor walked the route LaToya would have taken to the bus stop, her eyes scanning every shadow, every discarded item, praying for a sign. Malia, just 10 years old, joined her, her innocent eyes wide with a fear she didn't fully comprehend, clutching a teddy bear, convinced her sister would soon return to play. The community rallied around them, a testament to LaToya's impact. Church members organized search parties, fanning out through parks and abandoned lots, their calls of "LaToya" swallowed by the vast indifference of the city. Local barbershops became impromptu information hubs, residents sharing rumors, sightings, anything that might offer a glimmer of hope. But the days bled into weeks, each passing moment deepening the despair. The vibrant discussions, the worried whispers, slowly gave way to a heavy, collective silence, punctuated only by the occasional mournful plea from Eleanor Jenkins. Then, just shy of 3 weeks after her disappearance, the devastating news arrived. On November 15, 1983, a group of teenagers playing in a secluded wooded area near the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, approximately 15 miles south of Cleveland, stumbled upon a sight that would forever scar their young minds. Partially concealed beneath a tangle of thorny bushes and decaying leaves lay human remains. The discovery site was desolate, a forgotten patch of wilderness often used by hikers and local youths for illicit activities, but rarely explored deeply. The air was thick with the damp, earthy smell of autumn decay, mingled with a faint, metallic odor that hinted at something far more sinister. The teenagers, initially thinking it was a discarded mannequin or a prank, soon realized the horrific truth. The clothing fragments, the distinctive jewelry, a small silver locket LaToya always wore, a gift from her grandmother, confirmed their worst fears. It was LaToya. The scene was meticulously processed by forensic teams, albeit with the limited technology of the time. The body, exposed to the elements for weeks, was significantly decomposed, making immediate cause of death difficult to ascertain. Yet, the signs of a brutal struggle were evident. The scattered leaves, the broken branches, the indentation in the soil, all told a silent story of violence. The medical examiner's report, released weeks later, confirmed that LaToya had died from blunt force trauma to the head and neck, suggesting a violent assault. There were also indications of sexual assault, though the advanced state of decomposition made definitive conclusions challenging. The report painted a grim picture: detailing the broken bones, the defensive wounds, the horrific final moments of a young life violently extinguished. The news ripped through the central community like a wildfire, turning simmering worry into a raging inferno of grief and anger. The initial dismissal by the police department now felt like a cruel betrayal. The press, initially indifferent, now descended, their cameras flashing, microphones thrusting into the faces of grieving family members, seeking sound bites of raw pain. The investigation that followed was marred by a combination of systemic issues and critical errors. Detectives assigned to the case, many of whom were inexperienced in major homicide investigations, faced immense pressure from the community and the media. However, resources were scarce, and the department, struggling with budget cuts and a reputation for racial bias, seemed ill-equipped to handle the complexity of the crime. Key evidence, such as soil samples, trace fibers, and fragmented biological material, was collected, but with a lack of sophisticated forensic techniques available in the early 80s, much of it remained unanalyzed or improperly stored. Eyewitness accounts, crucial in any investigation, were inconsistent and often contradictory. Several individuals claimed to have seen LaToya near the bus stop that night, but descriptions of a suspicious vehicle or individual varied wildly. A transient man who frequented the area was briefly questioned, but quickly released due to lack of evidence. The case slowly began to lose momentum, eventually sliding into the dreaded category of cold. For the Jenkins family, the ensuing years were an agonizing purgatory. Each birthday, each holiday, each passing season brought a fresh wave of grief, a painful reminder of LaToya's absence. Eleanor Jenkins became a fierce advocate, relentlessly calling the police department, demanding updates, refusing to let LaToya's memory fade into the cold files of unsolved crimes. She attended every community meeting, spoke to every local reporter who would listen, her voice hoarse with pain but resolute in its plea for justice. Robert, more stoic, retreated into himself, carrying his grief like a heavy, invisible cloak. Malia, LaToya's younger sister, grew up in the shadow of this tragedy, forever marked by the gaping hole in her family, a constant sense of unease gnawing at her spirit. The community, too, carried the weight of LaToya's unsolved murder. It became a painful symbol of the perceived indifference to the perceived indifference to the lives of Black citizens in Cleveland, a testament to the feeling that justice was a privilege, not a right. Whispers circulated, theories blossomed in the fertile ground of fear and frustration. Some spoke of a serial killer, pointing to other unsolved disappearances and murders of young Black women in the Cleveland area during that tumultuous period, suggesting a sinister pattern, a predator stalking the unsuspecting. Others speculated about a local gang, a vendetta, or even a scorned lover, though LaToya was not known to have any enemies or tumultuous relationships. The psychological toll on the community was immense, fostering an environment of suspicion and eroding trust in law enforcement. Every stranger became a potential suspect, every shadow a lurking threat. The fear was palpable, a chilling undercurrent beneath the surface of everyday life. Decades passed. The world changed. Technology advanced at an exponential rate. But LaToya's case remained stubbornly cold, gathering dust in the archives. Eleanor Jenkins, though aging, never gave up hope. She became a fixture at the annual National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE, cold case conferences, presenting LaToya's photo, her voice a steady drumbeat for justice. Her relentless advocacy eventually caught the attention of a new generation of detectives, specifically Detective Sergeant Reginald Reggie Monroe, a Cleveland native who had grown up in a neighborhood not far from LaToya's. Monroe, himself a Black man, understood the historical context, the ingrained distrust, and the urgent need for closure for families like the Jenkins. In 2018, nearly 35 years after LaToya's murder, Detective Monroe decided to personally re-examine the case, pulling the voluminous files from the precinct's dusty cold case vault. The documents, yellowed with age, smelled faintly of mildew and forgotten sorrow. He pored over every page, every report, every interview transcript, looking for what had been missed, for the subtle anomaly that might have been overlooked in the haste and limitations of the past. Monroe's fresh eyes quickly identified several critical shortcomings in the original investigation. The evidence log was incomplete, some items vaguely described, others with missing chain of custody documentation. He cross-referenced LaToya's case with other unsolved homicides of young women from the same period, hoping to find a pattern that had eluded previous investigators. While there were similarities in victim demographics, the modus operandi varied enough to prevent an easy link to a single serial offender. However, one specific detail in the original medical examiner's report caught his attention: the presence of a faint, almost microscopic, fiber found embedded in LaToya's clothing, described simply as unidentified synthetic fiber. In 1983, such a finding would have been nearly impossible to analyze comprehensively. But in 2018, with the advent of advanced forensic analysis techniques, it represented a potential goldmine. Monroe submitted the fiber, along with other biological samples that had been carefully preserved, to the state crime lab for reanalysis, specifically requesting mitochondrial DNA testing, a revolutionary technique that could extract DNA from even highly degraded samples. The wait was agonizing. Each day felt like an eternity as the Jenkins family, now including a grown Malia and LaToya's parents who were well into their 70s, clung to this renewed flicker of hope. Detective Monroe immersed himself in the case, living and breathing LaToya's story. He revisited the desolate patch of woods where her body was found, a place now overgrown but still carrying an eerie silence. He imagined the scene, piecing together the last moments of her life with a clarity impossible for the original investigators. He drove the bus route LaToya would have taken, sat at the bus stop, observed the rhythms of the neighborhood, trying to see it through her eyes and through the eyes of a predator. He even sought out retired officers who had worked on the original case, some of whom remembered the initial frustration, the feeling of futility against the backdrop of limited resources and a growing city crime rate. Many recalled the public pressure, the accusations of indifference, and the eventual quiet shelving of the file. Monroe felt the weight of their failures and the fierce urgency of Eleanor Jenkins's enduring pain driving him forward. He understood that a cold case wasn't just about solving a crime, it was about honoring a life and healing a community. The unidentified synthetic fiber was just one thread, but it represented the leap in science, the hope that what was invisible then could be undeniable now. He had learned that sometimes justice wasn't about finding new evidence, but about looking at old evidence with new eyes and new tools. The decades that had passed had eroded memories and scattered witnesses, but they had also given birth to scientific marvels like DNA analysis, which could speak volumes from the smallest trace. Months later, the call came. The state crime lab had found a partial DNA profile from one of the biological samples, a semen stain that had been collected and preserved, though its significance wasn't fully understood at the time of the original investigation. The partial profile was then run through CODIS, the National DNA Database. There was no direct match to a known offender, which was disheartening but not entirely unexpected given the time frame. However, the advanced forensic genealogists working with the lab had utilized genetic genealogy techniques, reconstructing a family tree based on the partial DNA profile. This painstaking process involved uploading the DNA sequence to public genealogy databases and finding distant relatives of the unknown perpetrator. From there, working backward through generations, they began to narrow down potential suspects. The genealogical search, a meticulous and often frustrating endeavor, slowly but surely yielded results. It was not a quick match, but a laborious reconstruction, akin to assembling a complex puzzle with missing pieces. The DNA profile, while robust enough for family matching, was still partial, meaning the genealogists, a dedicated team led by Dr. Evelyn Reed, had to cast a wide net. They uploaded the anonymous profile to several public genealogy databases, careful to navigate the privacy implications. The initial matches were to third or fourth cousins, individuals who might share a common great-great-grandparent with the unknown perpetrator. Dr. Reed and her team then began the painstaking work of building family trees upward from these distant matches, tracing ancestors back through census records, obituaries, birth and death certificates, and old newspaper clippings. Each branch, each name was meticulously documented. They then worked their way down, searching for individuals who would be in the right age range and geographic location to have committed the crime. This process could take months, even years, and often hit dead ends. The frustration was immense, but the dedication of Dr. Reed, who had grown up hearing whispers of cold cases like LaToya's, was unwavering. She understood that for the Jenkins family, this was their last hope. The list of potential suspects, initially hundreds, slowly began to shrink until a specific lineage, anchored in Cleveland for generations, started to emerge. Within this family tree, a name emerged, one that shocked Monroe to his core: Arthur Vance. Arthur Vance. The name resonated through the central community like a hollowed bell. Deacon Arthur Vance was a pillar of the community, a respected elder, a devoted husband and a father, known for his resonant baritone voice that led the church choir every Sunday. He was a man who had offered words of comfort to Eleanor Jenkins at LaToya's memorial service, his arm a supportive presence around Robert's shoulder, his eyes filled with a seemingly genuine sorrow. Deacon Vance was a man who had participated in community fundraisers for missing persons, always advocating for justice. He was a man revered, trusted, and above suspicion. The very idea seemed ludicrous, a cruel twist of fate, or worse, a malicious error. Detective Monroe initially resisted the idea, grappling with the profound implications of such an accusation. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Deacon Vance, the man who had been a quiet, reassuring presence at community events throughout his own childhood, the man who had officiated the funerals of Monroe's own relatives, it seemed impossible, a betrayal not just of the Jenkins family, but of the entire moral fabric of their neighborhood. He knew the devastating impact it would have on the community, shattering the fragile trust that had been painstakingly rebuilt over decades. But the science was undeniable. The genetological link was strong, pointing directly to Vance. Monroe initiated discreet surveillance, observing the deacon's daily routines, his interactions, searching for any inconsistency, any hidden darkness that might align with the profile of a brutal killer. He watched Vance lead prayer groups, tend to his meticulously manicured garden, chat amiably with neighbors on his porch. Every observation only deepened the cognitive dissonance. Vance was the embodiment of respectability, his life an open book of good deeds. Monroe scoured Vance's background, pulling old records, looking for arrests, for any hint of violence. What he found was a seemingly spotless record, a life dedicated to public service and piety. This only intensified the horror of the emerging truth. How could such a respected figure harbor such a monstrous secret? The cognitive dissonance was almost unbearable. Monroe found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about people, about good and evil, about the masks individuals wear. He knew he had to be absolutely certain before making a move that would tear the community apart. The detective then began to quietly interview members of Vance's extended family under the guise of an unrelated cold case review, subtly gathering more DNA samples from distant relatives, aiming to confirm the genealogical link with greater certainty. He crafted elaborate cover stories, presenting himself as a detective interested in a series of unsolved burglaries from the 80s or a historical community project. He spoke to second cousins twice removed, to nephews and nieces, always casually requesting a discarded tissue or a half-empty water bottle, any item that might contain a trace of their DNA. He explained a need for a broad genetic pool for statistical analysis related to his bogus cases. The process was painstakingly slow, requiring delicate maneuvering to avoid raising alarms. He needed to narrow the tree further to get closer to Vance himself. The pressure was immense. He knew that any misstep could tip Vance off, allowing him to flee or destroy evidence. Eleanor Jenkins called him weakly, her voice a mix of hope and weariness. Monroe felt the weight of her enduring faith in him and the immense responsibility to get this right, not just for LaToya, but for all the victims of indifference. Finally, a direct familial DNA sample, obtained discreetly from a discarded item of Vance's during surveillance, provided the irrefutable evidence. It was a coffee cup, casually left on a park bench during one of Vance's morning walks, retrieved by Monroe himself, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and exhilaration. The full DNA profile matched the semen found on LaToya Jenkins' clothing. The match was definitive, a 1 in trillions probability, leaving no room for doubt. The scientific certainty was a cold, hard blow. The man who had offered solace to LaToya's grieving family, who had led prayers for her soul, was, in fact, her killer. Monroe sat in his office, staring at the conclusive report, the image of Vance's kind, creased face flashing in his mind. The betrayal was so profound, so deeply rooted, that it felt like a sickness. He knew that the next steps would be among the most difficult of his career, not just in terms of law enforcement, but in terms of confronting a community's deepest fears. He picked up the phone to call his captain, his hand shaking slightly. The long silence had finally been broken, but the truth it revealed was horrifying. The revelation was a seismic shock, a profound betrayal that would ripple through the Central community for years to come. On a crisp Tuesday morning in April 2019, 36 years after LaToya's murder, Deacon Arthur Vance, then 74 years old, was arrested. The scene unfolded as he emerged from his home, dressed in his customary Sunday best, on his way to a weekly Bible study group. 2 unmarked police cruisers pulled up quietly. Uniformed officers, their faces grim, approached him calmly, presenting the warrant. "Deacon Vance, we have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the 1983 murder of LaToya Jenkins." The words hung in the air, heavy and absurd. Vance's reaction was one of stunned silence, his normally benevolent expression freezing, a slow dawning horror in his eyes, a mask of carefully constructed piety finally cracking. He dropped the worn leather Bible he carried, its pages fluttering open on the sidewalk. He offered no resistance, no argument, only a profound, shuddering sigh as the handcuffs clicked into place, the metallic sound echoing in the sudden, oppressive quiet of the street. Neighbors, some already gathered for the Bible study, watched in disbelief. Mrs. Henderson, who lived across the street, clutched her chest, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. Younger children, playing hopscotch down the block, paused, sensing the sudden grave change in the adult world around them. The news spread like wildfire, igniting a mixture of outrage, sorrow, and utter bewilderment. Phones rang off the hook, social media exploded, and local news vans descended on the tranquil street within minutes. The formal announcement by the Cleveland Police Department, flanked by Detective Monroe and a stoic Eleanor Jenkins, was a moment charged with a bittersweet tension. Eleanor, her voice stronger than it had been in decades, spoke of the pain, the perseverance, and the ultimate, albeit delayed, arrival of justice. She didn't shout or rage, but her quiet, dignified strength was more powerful than any outburst. 36 years, she said, her voice clear despite its tremor. 36 years we waited. We never gave up hope. And today, LaToya can finally rest. But the public reaction was one of profound bewilderment. How could Deacon Vance, a man synonymous with moral integrity and community leadership, be capable of such a heinous crime? Old-timers recounted stories of Vance's generosity, his mentorship of young men, his unwavering presence at every community event. He had led food drives, organized youth sports, counseled countless families through hardship. Younger generations knew him as the kind elder, the gentle voice of reason. Many refused to believe it, clung to the idea of a mistaken identity, a frame-up. The psychological impact on the Black community was immense, a reopening of old wounds, a shattering of trust in institutions, and, more painfully, in individuals within their own trusted circles. It felt like another layer of innocence had been stripped away, replaced by a chilling suspicion of the familiar. People questioned their own judgment, their ability to discern good from evil. The very foundation of their closely knit community seemed to crack under the weight of this revelation. The fear that had been dormant for decades now surged, but this time it was directed inward, at the faces they thought they knew. During the interrogation, Arthur Vance initially maintained his innocence, feigning confusion and indignation. He sat across from Monroe, his posture upright, his hands clasped, a picture of injured rectitude. "Detective, I assure you, this is a grave mistake. I am a man of God. I have no knowledge of this young woman's tragic death." He tried to project an air of calm authority, attempting to turn the interrogation into a discussion of his good deeds and community standing. But Monroe, hardened by years of dealing with deception, was unyielding. He calmly presented the overwhelming DNA evidence, the meticulously compiled genealogical data, and finally, the photographs of LaToya. He laid out the crime scene photos too, images of the brutal truth that had been hidden for so long. LaToya's youthful face stared out from the past, innocent and vibrant, contrasting starkly with the grim evidence. Vance's composure began to crumble. His eyes flickered, his voice wavered, and the carefully constructed mask of piety slowly cracked. He tried to offer an alibi, a vague story about being out of town, then another about being ill. Monroe, however, had meticulously cross-referenced Vance's life with LaToya's last known movements, finding numerous inconsistencies. Eventually, after hours of relentless questioning, the facade gave way and a chilling, partial confession emerged. It wasn't a sudden breakdown, but a slow, calculated retreat into a narrative of diminished responsibility. He admitted to encountering LaToya at the bus stop that night, offering her a ride. He painted it as an act of seemingly benign kindness, an offer to a young woman waiting in the cold, but he then revealed the predatory lure beneath it. He claimed it was a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment, fueled by alcohol and a sudden, inexplicable rage when she resisted his advances. He detailed the struggle in his car, the drive to the secluded woods, the brutal act, and the subsequent cover-up, leaving LaToya's body to the elements, praying his sin would remain buried forever. He described the impact, the sudden silence, the terrible realization of what he had done. He spoke of panic, of the desperate need to hide his actions, not out of remorse for LaToya, but out of a desperate fear of losing his respected standing. His account was cold, detached, devoid of genuine remorse, painting a terrifying picture of a man who had lived a double life, a wolf in sheep's clothing, hiding in plain sight for decades. He never expressed regret for LaToya's lost life, only for the unraveling of his own carefully constructed existence. Monroe sat listening, a cold dread settling over him. This wasn't a crime of passion as Vance tried to frame it. It was a calculated act of violence followed by decades of cynical deception. The subsequent trial was a spectacle, drawing national attention. The small courtroom in Cleveland overflowed daily with media, community members, and legal observers. Eleanor and Robert Jenkins sat in the front row every day, their faces a testament to endurance, their eyes fixed on the man who had stolen their daughter's future. Eleanor, particularly, radiated a quiet defiance, a determination to witness every moment of justice. Malia, now a woman in her late 40s, spoke eloquently of the gaping hole LaToya's absence had left in their lives. Her testimony was heart-wrenching, describing growing up without her older sister, the constant questions, the fear that permeated their home. She spoke of the family traditions that were broken, the milestones LaToya never reached, the phantom limb of grief that never truly healed. She recounted her childhood memories of LaToya, painting a vivid picture of the bright, promising young woman Vance had murdered, contrasting it with the decades of silence and unanswered prayers. Vance's defense team argued for mitigating circumstances, attempting to paint him as a man driven to an isolated act of madness, an anomaly in an otherwise exemplary life. They emphasized his years of community service, his spotless record, his advanced age, suggesting that the DNA evidence, while compelling, might have been contaminated or misinterpreted in some way, or that perhaps the act was entirely out of character, a momentary aberration. They brought in character witnesses from the church, men and women who testified to Vance's unwavering faith and moral uprightness, their words ringing hollow against the stark reality of the forensic evidence. But the prosecution, led by a formidable district attorney, meticulously dismantled this narrative. They presented the brutal forensic evidence, the detailed medical examiner's report, and the chilling confession, highlighting the calculated nature of his actions. They methodically outlined the deliberate choice to discard LaToya's body in a remote location, the cynical way he had inserted himself into the grieving family's life, offering false comfort while harboring a dark secret. They showed how Vance's life of piety was a carefully constructed facade, a shield behind which he hid his monstrous deeds. Detective Monroe's testimony, detailing the painstaking cold case review and the breakthrough DNA evidence, was central to their case. He spoke with a quiet authority, presenting the facts without embellishment, allowing the science to speak for itself. The jury, composed of individuals from diverse backgrounds within Cleveland, faced the difficult task of reconciling the image of Deacon Vance, the respected community leader, with the undeniable evidence of Arthur Vance, the brutal killer. After intense deliberation, struggling with the shocking duality of the man, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. A collective gasp, then a wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Eleanor Jenkins closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her weathered cheek, a tear of relief mixed with unimaginable sorrow. Robert reached for her hand, his grip firm. Arthur Vance, still outwardly composed, seemed to shrink slightly, the weight of judgment finally settling upon him. He was sentenced to life in prison, bringing a long-awaited, albeit painful, sense of closure to the Jenkins family. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, spoke of the profound breach of trust, the loss of innocence, and the justice that, though delayed, could not be denied. The story of LaToya Jenkins and Arthur Vance is a stark reminder of the insidious nature of evil, how it can masquerade behind a veil of respectability, deeply embedded within the very communities it preys upon. The decades of silence, the initial institutional indifference, and the eventual shocking revelation of the perpetrator's identity left an indelible scar on Cleveland's Black community. It forced a painful introspection into the nature of trust, the unseen monsters lurking beneath the surface of everyday life, and the enduring resilience required to fight for justice even when all hope seems lost. The case highlighted not only the historical inequities within the justice system, particularly concerning crimes against Black women, but also demonstrated the transformative power of evolving forensic science and the tireless dedication of those who refuse to let the forgotten remain forgotten. The conviction of Arthur Vance, while a victory for justice, was not a balm that could erase 36 years of suffering. For the Jenkins family, the pain remained, but it was now coupled with the solemn satisfaction of knowing LaToya's killer would face accountability. Eleanor Jenkins, though frail, found a new purpose in sharing LaToya's story, advocating for other cold case victims, ensuring that no family would have to wait as long as hers did for answers. Malia, now able to speak of LaToya without the crushing weight of the unknown, began to heal, carrying her sister's memory as a source of strength rather than sorrow. The full scope of the darkness he carried and the pain it inflicted may never be completely understood. His life of deception stands as a chilling monument to the hidden capacities for evil and a stark reminder that sometimes the monster is not a stranger in the shadows, but a familiar face bathed in the light. The fallout from Arthur Vance's arrest and conviction was multifaceted, extending far beyond the immediate shockwaves. For the central neighborhood, it was a profound spiritual crisis. The church, usually a sanctuary of unwavering faith and community strength, became a place of agonizing questions. How could God allow such evil to fester in their midst, cloaked in piety? How had they, the congregation, been so blind? Sermons turned introspective, grappling with themes of discernment, forgiveness, and the fallibility of man. Attendance dwindled for a time, as some members found themselves unable to reconcile their faith with the betrayal, while others flocked, seeking solace at a communal healing. The Reverend James Holloway, who had served the church for over 2 decades, openly wept during a Sunday service, confessing his own anguish and confusion, his trust in a dear friend irrevocably shattered. He spoke of the need to confront the darkness not just outside their doors, but within the human heart itself, and to rebuild their community on a foundation of honest vigilance rather than naive trust. The potlucks and bake sales, once brimming with laughter, now carried an undercurrent of uneasy conversation, a constant reevaluation of every shared smile and every kind word exchanged in the past. Every pleasant interaction with Vance, every piece of advice he offered, every hand he shook was now replayed in the minds of his neighbors, tainted by the horrifying truth. Was his kindness a mask, a calculated performance? Or was it real, an unsettling duality that defied easy explanation? The question of how someone could commit such a monstrous act and then live a life of apparent rectitude became a haunting riddle. The psychological landscape of Cleveland's Black community was irrevocably altered. The initial fear of an unknown predator had been replaced by a more insidious terror, the realization that evil could wear the face of a trusted leader, a man who had walked among them, ate with them, prayed with them. This wasn't merely a breach of trust, it was an existential shock. Mothers began to scrutinize the men in their daughters' lives with a new unsettling skepticism. Elders questioned their own wisdom, their ability to guide and protect. Conversations about respectability politics took on a grim new meaning, as the carefully curated image of a virtuous community member proved to be a facade for unimaginable depravity. Support groups formed, not just for the Jenkins family, but for others in the community grappling with the trauma. Therapists specializing in community-level grief and betrayal became invaluable, helping residents process the complex layers of anger, sorrow, and self-blame. Young people, particularly, struggled with the implications, their nascent faith in community and institutions shaken at a fundamental level. It cast a long shadow, making it harder to rebuild the social cohesion that had been so vital to their resilience. The unspoken rule of protecting our own suddenly felt like a dangerous blind spot, a vulnerability that a predator like Vance had expertly exploited. Eleanor and Malia Jenkins, however, chose not to dwell solely on the trauma. The conviction, while not bringing LaToya back, provided a bedrock of certainty from which they could begin to build something new. Eleanor, despite your advanced age and increasing frailty, transformed her grief into a powerful, quiet force for change. She became a vocal advocate for victims of unsolved crimes, particularly those involving marginalized women. She joined local and national organizations, lending her voice and story to legislative efforts aimed at improving cold case funding and forensic capabilities. Her living room, once a sanctuary of private grief, became an impromptu office filled with folders, news clippings, and advocacy materials. She would often say, with a poignant resolve, "LaToya's voice was silenced, but mine won't be." She met with other families, sharing strategies, offering comfort, and reminding them that hope, however faint, must never be extinguished. She knew that the police couldn't solve every case, but that families, united, could create a powerful impetus for action. Her advocacy focused on systemic changes, particularly pushing for streamlined DNA testing processes and the establishment of dedicated, well-funded cold case units in police departments across Ohio, ensuring that future victims wouldn't face the same decades-long wait for justice. Malia, LaToya's younger sister, found her own path to healing and advocacy. The weight of the unknown, which had shadowed her entire adult life, lifted somewhat with Vance's conviction. She pursued a career in social work, dedicating herself to supporting victims of violence and their families, ensuring they received the emotional and practical resources her own family had so desperately lacked. She frequently spoke at community events, sharing LaToya's story not as a tale of despair, but as a testament to resilience and the power of persistence. She became a mentor to young women in Cleveland, teaching them about personal safety, healthy relationships, and the importance of trusting their instincts. Her message was clear: never let fear define you, but always be aware and always speak up. She carried a framed photograph of LaToya everywhere, a constant reminder of the sister she adored and the future that was stolen, transforming her sorrow into a driving force for prevention and healing. The two women, mother and daughter, became symbols of enduring strength, turning their profound loss into a legacy of tireless activism. They embodied the painful but powerful truth that while the wound of loss may never fully heal, one can choose how to carry the scar. Meanwhile, within the Cleveland Police Department, the success of LaToya Jenkins's case spurred significant internal reforms. Detective Sergeant Reginald Monroe was promoted and given the resources to establish a specialized cold case homicide unit, a long overdue initiative. The unit was tasked with revisiting hundreds of unsolved murders, especially those from the 1970s and 80s that had previously been hampered by a lack of technology, resources, or systemic bias. Monroe implemented rigorous new protocols for evidence collection, storage, and forensic analysis. He fostered partnerships with state and national forensic labs, ensuring access to cutting-edge DNA techniques like mitochondrial DNA and genetic genealogy. He also mandated ongoing training for detectives in historical context and victim advocacy, recognizing that solving a case required more than just forensic expertise. It demanded empathy and a deep understanding of community dynamics. The unit's initial focus was on cases involving Black women and girls, recognizing the historical disparity in attention and resources these cases had received. They began by cross-referencing cases, looking for patterns that might have been missed, similar modus operandi, or geographic clusters that could point to other unknown predators. In the wake of Vance's conviction, a critical question lingered: was LaToya his only victim? Monroe's team meticulously re-examined Vance's life, his travel history, his associations. While no direct link to other solved or cold cases was immediately established, the unsettling possibility remained. The unit reopened files on several other disappearances and murders of young Black women in the Cleveland area during the 70s and 80s, driven by the realization that if a pillar of the community like Vance could be a predator, others might also be hiding in plain sight. They delved into the archives, poring over old case notes, often finding the same frustrating omissions and a pervasive lack of follow-up that plagued LaToya's original investigation. One particular case, the 1979 disappearance of Aisha Brown, a 19-year-old student from the Glenville neighborhood, drew significant attention. Her remains were never found, and her case had been dismissed as a likely runaway at the time, despite her family's desperate pleas. Monroe's unit, inspired by the Jenkins case, utilized the new genealogical tools to reinvestigate Aisha's disappearance, hoping to uncover a similar breakthrough. The task was daunting. Memories had faded, witnesses had passed away, and original evidence was even scarcer than in LaToya's case. Yet the commitment was firm. Every cold case represented a life, a family, and a community awaiting answers. The discovery of Vance's true nature forced a difficult but necessary introspection within the police department itself, prompting a reckoning with its past failures and a renewed commitment to justice for all. They understood that restoring trust meant not just solving crimes, but acknowledging past injustices and actively working to rectify them. This dedication became the driving force behind the expanded cold case unit. The media, initially focused on the sensational aspects of Vance's arrest, slowly began to shift its narrative. Local journalists and investigative reporters dug deeper, producing documentaries and extended articles that explored the systemic issues underlying LaToya's decades-long cold case. They highlighted the disproportionate number of unsolved cases involving Black women, drawing parallels to national conversations about missing and murdered Indigenous women and women of color. The coverage expanded beyond Cleveland, sparking discussions in other cities about their own cold case backlogs and the inequities embedded within their justice systems. Public pressure mounted nationally for greater funding for forensic science and for policies that would prevent future cases from languishing for decades. The story of Arthur Vance, the church deacon, became a cautionary tale, a symbol of how deep-seated societal biases can inadvertently protect perpetrators and prolong the suffering of victims and their families. It forced a critical examination of how communities define safety and trust, and how easily these can be manipulated by those who prey on the innocent. For Arthur Vance, the illusion of his respectable life shattered completely within the walls of the correctional facility. His carefully cultivated persona dissolved, replaced by the grim reality of a convicted murderer. While he never offered a full, remorseful confession, the initial partial admission during interrogation suggested a deep-seated pathology. He clung to a narrative of temporary insanity or uncontrollable impulse, a desperate attempt to salvage some shred of his self-image. Yet, psychiatric evaluations painted a picture of a man with strong narcissistic tendencies, skilled at compartmentalization and manipulation, capable of projecting an entirely different persona to the world. His piety, it was hypothesized, served not as genuine faith, but as a potent shield, granting him unparalleled access and trust within the very community he violated. It was the ultimate camouflage. He had relished the respect and admiration, using it to insulate himself from suspicion. The thought of his participation in LaToya's memorial, of his consoling words to Eleanor, became a chilling testament to his profound capacity for deception, a calculated performance of grief while harboring the darkest of secrets. The prison walls, however, offered no audience for his performance, only the stark reality of his crimes and the quiet solitude of his punishment. He lived out his remaining years in obscurity, stripped of his community standing, his legacy irrevocably stained. The lingering questions continued to ripple through Cleveland. How many other secrets did Arthur Vance take to his grave? Were there other moments of weakness, other fleeting acts of violence that went unreported or unrecognized? The fear that had been dormant for decades now manifested as a heightened awareness, a painful lesson learned. The community was left with the challenge of holding on to its faith and its cohesion while acknowledging the vulnerability exposed by Vance's treachery. It fostered a resilience born of fire, a determination to protect future generations with more critical eyes and a stronger voice. The story of LaToya Jenkins, therefore, evolved from a tragic cold case into a powerful narrative of awakening. Her name became synonymous not just with loss, but with the enduring fight for justice, the transformative power of science, and the courageous spirit of a mother and sister who refused to let her be forgotten. The silence around LaToya's fate was broken, but the echoes of Vance's deception would forever serve as a stark reminder. The quest for truth must be relentless, and the masks people wear must always be critically examined. For Cleveland, 1983 was not just a year. It was a wound, slowly healing, but forever bearing the scar of a hidden monster, and the resilience of a community that eventually brought his dark deeds to light. The journey was arduous, filled with despair and false hopes, but ultimately, justice found its way, emerging from the shadows of indifference and the relentless pursuit of a detective and a family who refused to let LaToya's spirit be consigned to the past. The legacy of LaToya Jenkins became a powerful testament to the fact that even after decades, and even against the most unexpected betrayals, the truth can still emerge, demanding to be heard, demanding accountability, and inspiring a community to rise, albeit painfully, from the ashes of its own vulnerability.